Stop! Before you click away, I need to warn you. What you're about to hear is not a game, it's not fiction. This actually happened in real life. I have for you a compilation of 3 very scary, true stories from the r/scarystories community on Reddit. You won't believe what happens in the last story, so watch the video till the end. Until now, if you get scared easily, leave. This is your only warning. But if you're brave enough to stay, it will be one of the scariest stories you will ever hear in your life. Before we start, subscribe to Mikey HR and hit the like button. If you haven't watched these 2 videos, you've missed out on a lot. You can watch it on the channel after this video. I spend hours finding these stories so you don't have to. It takes 2 seconds, and it means everything. Now, turn off the lights. And let's begin. Story 1, my grandmother told me a scary bedtime story. Years later, I found out that the story she told me was horrifyingly true. I watched from a distance while my grandma and grandpa fished on their lake in the backyard. But one thing confused me. While grandpa cast his line and watched his rod, waiting for the anticipating tug of a fish, grandma's gaze remained fixed across the lake, her head tilted intently toward the dark fringe of woods. I never saw her look at the bobbing lures. She didn't even seem interested in fishing at all. I thought that maybe she just simply enjoyed looking at the trees, but a nagging feeling persisted. There was more to her gaze than a simple love for nature. It was summer break, and I decided to spend it at my grandparents' house in Knoxville, Tennessee. They lived in a 2-story house, recently built in 2018. It connected directly to a lake, with a dock jutting out on the far right side where my grandpa kept his bass boat. My grandparents were a sweet and quiet couple. They kept to themselves most of the time, living a peaceful life in their little corner of the world. Every summer, though, my visits became a tradition. Grandma's invitation was always an automatic yes. Her warm smile and gentle voice, a beacon calling me back. There were countless things to love about my grandma, her kindness and generosity at the top of the list. If I wanted something, it was usually an automatic yes from her too. But one of the things I truly cherished most was her stories. Unlike Grandpa, who mostly stuck to tales of his time in the military, exciting stories filled with bravery and adventure, of course, Grandma was a bottomless well of stories. Whether it was a funny story from her childhood, a heartwarming story about a kind neighbor, or a fantastical bedtime story that transported me to magical lands, Grandma always had one on hand. She was one of those special grandmas who could weave a story from thin air, her words painting vivid pictures in my mind. Grandpa, on the other hand, was a man of few words. A quiet strength emanated from him, and the stories he did tell were always about his service. He'd talk about the places he'd been, the challenges he'd faced, and the lessons he'd learned. While not as fantastical as Grandma's stories, they held a different kind of magic, a testament to his resilience and the experiences that shaped him. One of the things I always admired about Grandpa was his outdoor skills. He'd tell me most of his knowledge came from his military training, jokingly saying they prepared him for anything. He was a true outdoorsman, the kind of person I'd trust implicitly if we were ever lost in the wilderness. He knew everything about fishing, the best spots on the lake, the best techniques to catch different types of fish. Some of my favorite memories were spent on his boat, cutting through the cool morning water, the sun rising over the horizon, and the gentle hum of the motor a comforting lullaby. Every night, Grandma dipped into her seemingly endless well of stories. I never quite understood how she did it. Her mind was like a sprawling library, shelves overflowing with stories to tell. One night she'd tell me a story of brave knights seeking vengeance, their swords gleaming in the sun. Another night she'd tell me a story of a land shimmering with magic spells and cursed lands. Then there were the scary stories. Now, Grandma usually avoided them. She knew how they affected me. But the thing about those stories was the detail. Oh man, the detail. They were so vivid. They were so real. It felt like I was peeking through a crack into another world. A world where the monsters and creatures she described lurked. A world so terrifying that I felt like falling through that crack would kill me. Every night was the same routine. Nestled under a patchwork quilt in the guest room, I'd wait with bated breath. The soft click of the doorknob was my cue. Grandma, her face etched with a lifetime of stories, would enter, a gentle smile gracing her lips. She'd pull up a rocking chair, its rhythmic creak adding to the lullaby effect. Then in a warm voice, she'd begin telling me a story. One night, though, tucked under the patchwork quilt, I waited for Grandma's nightly visit. The soft click of the doorknob announced her arrival. "Ready for another story?" she asked, her voice a warm rumble. I nodded eagerly. Nights at Grandma's were journeys to magical lands, each story more thrilling than the last. But tonight I craved a different kind of story, a different kind of excitement. "Can you tell me a scary story tonight, Grandma?" I blurted out. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by a thoughtful pause. Unlike her usual repertoire of action-packed adventures, her stories have always steered clear of scary ones. She sat beside me on the patchwork quilt, her usual mischievous eyes replaced by a thoughtful gaze. Her eyes flickered towards the window for a moment before returning to me. Then, with a gentle smile, she began. "Those woods outside your window," she started, her voice a warm rumble. I instinctively glanced towards the window, the familiar silhouette of the trees, outlined across the lake. "There's something in those woods," she continued, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. A shiver danced down my spine, though the room remained pleasantly warm. Those simple words made me so uncomfortable that I was tempted to just tell Grandma to stop. But the truth was, I was hooked. Grandma did tell me scary stories on rare occasions, but they were always fictional, completely disconnected from the real world. She continued, "Every 7 years, it comes out of those woods. It emerges, a creature that's been on this earth for thousands of years. It crawls on all fours. It hunts, a silent predator searching for its prey." I began to tense up a little. The room remained quiet, but the air felt heavy. "Its body is like a man, but twisted and contorted," she murmured, "and its limbs elongated, reaching out at odd angles. Its skin is black as coal, making it difficult to spot during the night." I swallowed hard, my eyes instinctively drawn back to the window. The trees, once comforting, now seemed to writhe with unseen shadows. "But the worst part," she continued, her voice barely a tremor, "is its eyes, multiple eyes scattered across its head like a spider. They pierce the darkness, searching for an unsuspecting victim." She continued, her voice a hushed whisper, sending shivers down my spine. "Sometimes, if it has trouble finding prey, it ventures closer to houses, searching for unlocked windows." My breath caught in my throat. The image of eyes peering through the glass sent a jolt of terror through me. "If it finds an opening," she murmured, It will crawl inside and snatch the closest person to it, dragging them back to the woods. I squeezed my eyes shut, the warmth of the quilt a poor barrier against the sudden chill. It keeps its victims alive for 7 long years, she whispered, feeding off them slowly until the hunger returns, and it's time to hunt once more. My grip tightened on the blanket, and my knuckles were white. A cold sweat was dripping down my skin. "But don't you worry," she said, her voice gentling. "As long as we keep the windows locked, we'll be safe. And don't forget to do the same at your mom's house." She rose from the quilt, her smile strained at the edges. A smile meant to reassure, but one that couldn't hide the sliver of unease in her eyes. Her movements seemed slow and deliberate as she walked towards the window. My eyes followed her, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She stared out of the window for a moment as if checking to make sure the thing wasn't around, and then she checked to make sure the window was locked. Just as she was about to turn away, I blurted out, unable to contain the question that had lodged itself in my throat. "Grandma, have you ever seen it?" She paused for a few moments, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face, before a reassuring smile crept onto her lips. She didn't answer me. She simply leaned down and kissed my forehead, a gesture filled with a strange intensity. "Good night, darling," she whispered. Then with a gentle click, she shut my door behind her. I was awake for most of that night, staring at the darkened window pane. The familiar silhouette of the woods outside now held a new kind of terror. I kept wondering if I would see that face my grandma described, a face with multiple eyes staring back at me. Eventually, exhausted from fear and lack of sleep, my eyelids drifted shut, and I finally drifted off. While I slept, I dreamt of its form shifting and writhing in the darkness. I ran, my legs pumping, but it was like I was running on ice. Panic seized me as the figure lunged, its long arms wrapping around my legs. It dragged me, a rag doll, through the grass, the stench of damp grass filling my nostrils. The woods grew bigger as the thing dragged me there, its jagged edges threatening to devour me whole. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Just as the branches of the trees were about to engulf me, I jolted awake, gasping for breath. Light streamed through the window, painting familiar shapes on the ceiling. The room held a peaceful stillness. It took several deep breaths to slow the pounding of my heart. Relief washed over me, chasing away the lingering dread. Since that night, despite Grandma's steady stream of new stories, the creature in the woods has remained a constant shadow in the corner of my mind. Thankfully, the nightmares, those terrifying chases through endless woods, didn't last. Slowly, the story faded from memory. A few years later, a different kind of darkness descended upon our family. Cancer, a cruel, selfish thief, stole my grandmother's health bit by bit. She fought for months, but in the end, the disease won. It left a hole in our lives, especially for Grandpa. Now he lives alone, the silence of the house heavy with her absence. Talking about her seems to bring a fresh wave of pain, etched deep into the lines on his face. Sometimes, he murmurs about just waiting for his turn to join her. It's a heartbreaking sight. A man transformed into a solitary figure, simply waiting to die. That year was a blur of grief, a dark tunnel we all had to navigate. But with the love and support of family and friends, we eventually managed to pull through. With each passing year, the grief lessened, but Grandma's memory remained. Then after another few years, during my senior year in high school, something happened. I walked into the house after a long day. The familiar scent of an empty house greeted me. Mom had already left for work. Pulling my backpack onto my bed, I pulled out my books and settled in for an evening of homework, studying, and the occasional break to watch TV. I shut off the TV, changed into my pajamas, and crawled into bed. Sleep, however, remained elusive. My mind was a tangled mess, tossing and turning over the events of the day. Finally, I peeked at the clock on my desk, its green glow reading almost 3 a.m. Just then, a sound shattered the silence, a sharp tap that echoed through the room. My eyes flew open, snapping towards the window. A wave of ice washed over me, freezing my blood solid. Memories of Grandma's story flooded back. The creature, the woods, there pressed against the glass, was a form that blocked most of the moonlight from filtering in. If not for the sliver of moonlight peeking in around what was blocking it, I wouldn't have been able to see it at all. Its human-shaped body pressed against the window, and across its head, I could have sworn I saw movement. A flicker, like multiple tiny insects scurrying across its flesh. Then a horrifying realization dawned on me. They weren't insects. They were eyelids flickering open and shut, scanning my room with frantic urgency. My breath hitched. Was this a dream? Just then, a shadowy limb, long and impossibly thin, snaked out towards the base of my window. Had I locked the window? The sickening sound of the window, as the glass began to slide up, hit my ears. Terror choked and screamed in my throat. There are woods behind my mom's house, too, and a sickening realization dawned on me. This wasn't just a story, it was real, and it was here. Adrenaline surged through me, and my flight or fight responses kicked in. I threw myself out of bed in a desperate scramble. My feet pounded the floor as I bolted towards the door, flinging it open, but my escape was cut short. The door slammed shut in my face, the force of it throwing me backward. A strangled cry escaped my lips as a wave of terror washed over me. My body locked up, and every muscle seized in a silent scream. Somehow, it was now in my room. That fast. It was no longer at the window. It was now above me, above my door. One of its grotesquely long limbs, tipped with a hand like a spider's claw, pressed firmly against the door, pinning me inside. Another seemed contorted at an unnatural angle, its fingers splayed against the wall in a grotesque parody of a grip. The head, if you could call it that, twisted on its neck in a way that defied human anatomy, almost spinning completely around. A chorus of eyes locked onto me. Trapped and alone, I stumbled back, my mind scrambling for any flicker of hope. The second floor was an escape route, but a leap out the window would likely result in injury, leaving me in a vulnerable position. Besides, that's where it probably wanted me. Right next to the door stood my wooden baseball bat. In a desperate lunge, I grabbed it, the wood rough against my grip. With a yell, I swung the bat with all my strength, connecting with a sickening thud. Splinters of wood rained down as the impact sent a tremor through the room. The creature recoiled slightly, its multiple eyes flickering in what might have been surprise. But the silence that followed was the most unsettling part. No roar of pain, no growl. This thing moved with an unnatural quiet. Even as it moved, it made no noise. It descended to the floor, its grotesque form dwarfing the space in my room. As it loomed closer, lowering its body in a predatory crouch, I swung the mangled bat wildly, The bat connected with a bone-crunching impact, sending more shards of wood flying through the air. The creature recoiled, its grotesque form momentarily faltering. Seizing my chance, I bolted past the thing, flung open the bedroom door, and slammed it shut behind me with a resounding bang. Adrenaline pumping, I raced down the stairs, each step echoing in the sudden silence. Reaching the living room, I fumbled for the light switch, illuminating the space with a warm glow. Panting, I gripped the broken bat like a lifeline. Its splintered end pointed toward the top of the stairs, towards the thing in my room. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the tense silence. The creak of the front door opening. A silhouette emerged from the doorway, the dim porch light casting long shadows across her face. "There you are," my mom's voice laced with exhaustion. "What the hell are you—" The sentence died on her lips, completely cut short. Her eyes widened, but neither she nor I had time to react. In a sharp and quick moment, a shadowy, distorted limb, tipped with a spidery claw, shot out, wrapping around my mother's waist. It snagged her, sinking its talons deep into her flesh, a sickening tear echoing in the sudden silence. A strangled noise bubbled in her throat, cut short before it could form a scream. But then I heard her scream fully formed as the thing dragged her away to the woods. I ran with all my effort, but the thing was fast, too fast. All I could do was keep running, watching, as my mom unscreamed with her arms folded around the creature's arm in a desperate attempt to escape. It had her, though, exactly where it wanted her, out in the open. I fell face first into the grass, a sob just wrenching its way out of my chest. Warm tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision as I watched in horror. Mom's screams turned into blood-curdling shrieks, fading into a horrifying silence as they disappeared into the indistinguishable maw of the woods. The police came, but what could they do? What could I tell them? I told them exactly what I saw. They looked at me like I was crazy, but what else could I say? For hours I sat in a sterile interrogation room, the harsh overhead light blurring my vision. They questioned me over and over, dissecting my story, searching for inconsistencies. But all I could do was repeat the horrifying scene, my voice cracking with each retelling. There was no evidence to tie me to my mom's disappearance, nothing but my frantic pleas and the raw terror etched onto my face. Finally, they seemed to reach a reluctant roadblock. With a sigh and a dismissive glance, they released me. Now a search party combs the backyard, venturing into the dense woods behind our house. Bloodhounds sniff the damp earth, their mournful howls echoing through the trees. In my room, the silence pressing down on me like a physical weight. As the harsh light of dawn breaks, I stare at the window. A large handprint, a grotesque, splayed imprint of multiple fingers, clings to the outside of the glass. A cold realization settles over me. Now I know that at least one of my grandma's stories is real. Story 2. Please help me. I hate living near the water. I've watched people romanticize coastal cities my entire life, and it makes me sick. The souvenirs, the "I'm secretly a mermaid" signs, the lifeguard-inspired apparel. For most people, this is their vacation. They can kick back on the sand, open the newest novel that is being made into some streaming show, and listen to the waves. And maybe I didn't always feel this way. Maybe there was a time where I enjoyed the tiny rocks, a time where looking for seashells brought me joy. But I won't ever know that feeling again. Not since her. And since then, this place has become my hell that I can't escape from. I was 21 when I first started working at the ocean equipment rental stand. It was an easy gig. Take some deposits, obtain waivers, and then just hosing everything down at the end of the day. I don't think I hated the ocean then, but you wouldn't catch me near it if I could help it. It's too dark, too vast, and it always felt too smart. Like it knew us better than we knew it. It was a Saturday evening. I was closing up the stand alone, but it wasn't too bad. It was the end of tourist season, so we weren't nearly as busy as we normally got. I was doing a final count on our boards when I noticed one was missing. Not completely uncommon, but I had to make an attempt to look for it before charging whatever card was on file for it. I pulled up the system and figured out it was a red board. I sighed, put my clipboard down, and took a short glance around the shop. Not there, obviously. There were times when people just left their rentals outside, and I hadn't been out in a few hours, so I grabbed my phone and stepped outside the door. I scanned the sandy wooden walkway, looking for anything lingering, but found nothing. I began to give up when I happened to look up at and see a line of red about halfway down the beach. Damn it, I mumbled to myself. I locked the door behind me, pulled up the hoodie of my sweatshirt, and began the walk towards the missing board. I was so irritated. I couldn't stop asking myself why people were so selfish, why they couldn't just be adults and return what they borrow. I was already figuring out some kind of fee to charge that card, something like annoyance fee, return your crap. I finally made it to the area and saw our logo clear as day on the board. I bent down to swoop it up and then turned to head back to the shed. I was happy I found the board, but I was already thinking about my plans after work. I even had an alarm set on my phone at my scheduled close time, so I could get out of there ASAP. My brother Jeff invited me to a bonfire with some of his frat buddies, and I was sure there would be some girls. Just then, my thoughts were interrupted by a loud scream. I jumped back, clutching the board in my hands as I looked up and down the beach. The scream happened again, only this time it turned into a wail. It was one of the worst sounds I have ever heard. "Hello?" I called out. "Do you need help?" Sobbing continued on, mixing with the crashing of the waves. The sun had already set. There was a soft light coming from the horizon, but I knew I only had a few minutes before I couldn't see anything. I squinted at the shoreline. I didn't see any human forms. I looked to the opposite side of the beach, the walkway to the parking lot. Behind me, I didn't see anything. There was an older gentleman sitting on one of the benches by the walkway, but he was unaffected, as if he hadn't heard the sound at all. I stood still for a moment. My heart was pounding in my head, thinking I wasn't imagining the sound, right? "Hello?" I called again, but no one answered. I stared at the shoreline for another moment and then turned to head back to the shed. On the way back, I passed the old man and we gave each other a standard polite nod. I'm normally not chatty with strangers, but I couldn't help myself. "Excuse me, sir, did you just hear that noise?" I asked him. The old man was staring out at the ocean. I would have thought he was dead if he hadn't blinked. "Noise?" he asked me. "Yeah. I heard what sounded like a woman. She was crying, I think. It was really loud, but I don't see anyone," I responded. "Nope, didn't hear a thing." The old man responded quickly. "Are you sure? Because I swear I began. "I didn't hear anything, boy. And if you were smart, you would pretend you didn't either." He interrupted, finally snapping his cold eyes on me. What the hell was this guy's problem? I stared at the man, dumbfounded, for what felt like several minutes. I was about to open my mouth to rip him a new one when the sound came again. It was a wail, then a whimper. They sounded hurt. I then noticed that the old man's eyes fluttered just for a second. "So you do hear it?" I asked, feeling fairly smug. The old man put his weight on his cane and stood up. He was more frail than I originally thought. I immediately felt guilty for pushing him. "You're going to do what you want to do, boy, but if you go down that path, ain't nobody going to be able to save you, least of all yourself," he told me before turning and heading back up the walkway. I blinked at him a few times, trying to decode his cryptic warning. Then the scream happened again. This time it sounded like it was right behind me. I whipped around, dropping the red board in the sand, and saw no one there. But something caught my eye. High up on the rocks was a flash of white. I squinted and saw a girl stuck on the rocks. She was curled up in a ball. The waves crashed into the rocks over and over, barely a few feet away from taking her with them. I didn't think. I dropped the board and ran to the rocks, waving my arms and shouting, "Hey, hey, I'm coming, hang on," I yelled. I saw her face turn in my direction, just barely. As I got closer, I was able to see her black hair weighed down her back by the water. Her skin was like snow, and her eyes were red from crying. I had to help her. I reached her just as the waves crashed barely a foot away from her, which made her shriek and attempt to back up. "Are you hurt?" I yelled over the sounds of ocean. She nodded and fresh tears sprang from her eyes. "Please help me," she said softly. And I shouldn't have been able to hear her, but it felt like she spoke it directly into my head. My heart did a weird jump. "Of course, I'm going to pick you up, okay? Put your arms around my shoulders." She did as she was told, and I hoisted her up in one swoop, then carefully treaded down the rocks to the beach, silently sending thanks to all the rafts I've had to retrieve from these very rocks a million times. Who knew I would need the practice? I stepped onto the sand, right as the biggest wave I've seen crashed into the spot she was trapped in. I put her down in the dry sand, far enough away from the water, and caught my breath. She was shaking too, shivering it seemed. "Here, take this," I said, pulling my sweatshirt over my head and handing it to her. She gingerly took it and laid it across her lap. "Thank you, that is very kind," she said softly, peering up at me with the most vibrant green eyes I've ever seen. My heart began to race. Yeah, of course," I stammered. "How did you get up there anyways?" She sighed softly. "I truly don't remember," she said, looking out onto the ocean, and I could have been imagining it, but her green eyes looked happy, gleeful even. Who would be that joyful immediately after a near-death experience? "Well, I'm glad you're safe. Can I call someone for you?" I asked her. She pulled her dark hair over her shoulder and began to gently squeeze the water out. No, thank you," she answered. As the water fell out of her hair, it clung to her white dress even more, and the parts of it that were dry began to leave little to the imagination. I wasn't a total virgin, but the idea of seeing something right now when she was in a vulnerable position made my face turn red, and I quickly turned away. Okay, yup. If you need any warmer clothes, I can grab you some at my work," I offered, adjusting my stance to stand up. She quickly placed a firm hand on mine. "Oh, please don't leave. I quite like you," she said, her voice suddenly deeper, huskier. When I looked into her eyes, they were still green, but she looked lit up somehow, full of life. I figured it was the adrenaline. "I'll stay," I said, not entirely recognizing my own voice. "Good," she purred, "because I want to thank you for rescuing me." She gracefully moved closer to me, her eyes going hazy. and by some magnetic pull, I felt myself lean into her. "Are you from here?" I asked her softly as we leaned closer together. She laughed softly. "Something like that," she whispered, gently playing with the ends of my hair. "Do you wish to come home with me? I can show you so many things," she offered, her voice changing again. It was light, airy. It sounded like a songbird. I felt myself melting. My mind was racing, and I didn't think it was solely because of the innuendos. I began to say. Just then my phone alarm went off, signaling that it was time to head to the bonfire. The cheery tune began to blast through my pocket. I began to blink rapidly, my mind feeling a bit clearer, but not all the way. The girl snarled in anger. "I'm sorry, I'm not rejecting you. You've been through so much today. I don't want to take advantage." I started before she started digging her hands all around me, looking for something. Turn it off, she seethed. The alarm was still going, and the longer it went off, the clearer my head felt, but the most crazed the girl became. Hey, it's okay, it's just my alarm. 1 second, I'll grab it," I said, taking out my phone. Just as I hit dismiss, she looked up at me. But this was not the girl I saved. The green eyes were still green, but the shape was changed. Her lips were no longer full and plump, but thinned out, showing a flash of small pointed teeth. "What the?" I slowly said, scooting back on the sand. The girl wrapped long fingers around my face, smiling at me so violently that it felt painful to watch. She opened her sharp mouth, and I clenched my eyes, waiting for a bite. But she began to sing soft, sweet melodies that had my mind going fuzzy again. When I opened my eyes, she no longer looked terrifying. She looked just how she did when I rescued her. "Are you all right, my love?" she asked soothingly. I nodded, not fully in control of my own movements. "You're so tired. You wish to come home with me, yes? You can rest there," she whispered into my ear. I could feel myself beginning to nod when a gunshot went off. Back! A gruff voice called out. The girl sharply turned, and she was changed again. Her eyes cold, her skin covered in scales. She was a girl, yes, but she wasn't human. I didn't know what she was. Another gunshot rang out. "Next one is going straight at you. Be gone, go. You cannot take him," the voice yelled, coming closer. The girl hissed, and as my mind continued to clear, I watched her tear her dress away, revealing a gray tail and sharp nails on her hands now. She swiped at me once, and I was able to move fast enough to dodge it, though I stumbled through the movement. I heard a gun load right behind me, and the creature hissed and scurried to the shoreline. Once she reached the waves, a large one came out of nowhere and swallowed her into the black water. I was breathing heavily, shaking, trying to get a hold on my mind after the horror it just went through. "You sure didn't listen, huh?" I looked up and saw the old man from before standing next to me. What was that? Who was she? What just happened? I gasped. The man sighed. "Got a lot of names, that one. But now you know you hear a damsel in distress on a quiet beach. You can't always trust it," he told me. "But she was on the rocks. She was stuck. If she could swim, why did she need me to protect her from the water?" The old man laughed dryly. "Boy, she didn't need you to protect her from the ocean. The ocean was trying to protect you from her." He then patted my shoulder, turned, and headed back up to the beach, mumbling something about how kids these days never listen. I sat on the beach silently for hours. My mind was still a little fuzzy, and I couldn't make total sense of what happened. I eventually fell asleep, and I woke up when the sun was rising and a bird was pecking at my shoe. Once I was awake, I felt fully coherent, and I had to tell someone what happened. I took out my phone and called Jeff. He answered on the last ring, sounding groggy and mostly asleep. "What?" he grumbled. "Jeff, something happened," I said, choking on my words. I heard him immediately sit up. "Where are you?" he asked. I began to tell him the whole story, about the red board and the rocks, the girl with the changing voices, and the old man. Jeff was silent the whole time, but I knew he was still listening. "I'm freaking out, man," I said, finishing my tale. Jeff was quiet for a moment, then he chuckled. "Dude, if you didn't want to come to my party, you could have just said so." Story 3. Gary is literally me. Part 1 of 2. The rent on the house at the end of Sumner Lane was $650 a month, which in the year the Hale family signed the lease was the kind of number that made you check the closets for hidden cameras. Renata Hale checked anyway. She found nothing but a dead moth and a smell like an old wet sweater. And she decided that for $650 a month, the smell could stay. Renata was 31 and the oldest of the three of them, which is how she ended up as the one whose name was on everything. Her brother called her Sarge and had since high school because she ran every household she had ever lived in off a color-coded spreadsheet. Chores, bills, the rotation for who took out the trash. If a thing could be put in a cell on a grid, Renata put it there, and then she put a deadline next to it. Her brother, Marcus, was 26 and went by Moose. The nickname came from being a fat, enormous toddler who walked into things head first, like a battering ram in overalls, and it stuck even after he grew up tall and skinny and online. Moose's phone never once left his hand. He would tell you he was a content creator. His sister would tell you he was unemployed with very good lighting. Their mother, Deb, was 58, and she had moved in 2 months after the divorce, mostly to split the rent 3 ways, and partly because she could not stand the quiet of her old apartment. Deb believed in things. She read the horoscopes out loud at breakfast every single morning. She kept a velvet pouch of crystals in her purse and a bundle of dried sage on the kitchen windowsill. Her kids called her Madame Deb, with love, because in 20 years of premonitions, she had never once been right. She predicted a hurricane the week of a drought. The 4th member of the household, technically, was Tariq. Tariq was Renata's boyfriend, 33, an insurance adjuster who debunked things for a living and then debunked more things for fun. At parties, when somebody got 3 drinks in and started a ghost story, Tariq would quietly pull out his phone and find the article that explained it. That is why everyone called him Snopes. He moved his good coffee maker into the kitchen on the 2nd day and considered himself fully settled. The 4 of them had circled the listing for a week before they believed it. A whole house, just 2 stories, a yard, for the price of a 1-bedroom across town. "There's a catch," Tariq said, reading it for the 5th time. "There's always a catch. Foundation, mold, the neighbor's a guy who plays the bagpipes, something." "The catch is, it's in Crayhill," Renata said. "Nobody wants to live in Crayhill. We want to live in Crayhill because we're broke. It works out." "I have a feeling about it," Deb said. "Good or bad?" Moose asked. Deb thought about it. "I'll let you know," she said, which was Deb's horoscope for almost everything. So they signed. The landlord was a property company 3 states away that communicated only by email and seemed suspiciously thrilled to have anyone in the place at all. The keys came in a padded envelope with no note. The house was a 2-story with a steep, pointed roof, the kind built back when families were bigger and people were shorter. On move-in day, they hauled boxes up the walk until the living room looked like a cardboard fort. Tariq, going down the upstairs hallway with a wet rag and a sense of purpose, found a long, straight white line worked into the floorboards, running clear across the hall from one wall to the other. "What is this stuff?" he said, half to himself, crouching down. "That's where the last tenant drew the line," Moose said, not looking up from his phone. Tariq scrubbed it. It was gritty under the rag, fine and white and grainy, and it took him 3 hard passes to get it up. He sat back on his heels, looked at the clean floor, felt vaguely proud of himself, and did not think about it again. In the ceiling at the very end of the hallway, where the roof came down low, there was a square attic hatch with a short, knotted cord hanging down from one corner. Renata reached up and pulled the cord. Nothing moved. Somebody had painted the hatch over, sealed all the way around the edge until it sat up there in the ceiling. A flat, painted square that nobody had touched in years. "Huh," Renata said, tugging the cord again. "Attic hatch is painted over, like deliberately." "Probably full of bodies," Moose said. "Probably full of Christmas decorations," Renata said. "We'll deal with it if we ever need the storage." "Which we won't, because you own 400 hoodies and 0 of anything useful." 312 hoodies, Moose said. "Get your facts right, Sarge." Deb came up the stairs slow and stopped in the hall, right under the painted-over hatch. She put one hand flat on the wall, leaning into it, and she frowned. The kind of frown that means a person is listening hard to something nobody else in the room can hear. "This house has a feeling," she said. "Every house you've ever walked into has a feeling, Mom," Moose said. "The DMV has a feeling. The Olive Garden has a feeling. This one's different. They're all different. That's why they're feelings and not facts," Tariq said, and Deb swatted at him. And they went downstairs to order the kind of pizza you order when the kitchen is still in boxes. That first night, around 2 in the morning, Renata woke up dead certain that somebody had said her name, clear and close and certain, right outside her door. Ren. Just the one word, in a voice she almost recognized and couldn't place. She lay still a second. Then she called out, soft, into the dark. "Moose?" Nothing answered. She figured he had been talking in his sleep or talking to his phone, which for Moose was the same activity. She rolled over and went back under, and by morning she had let the whole thing go the way everybody lets the small hours go once the sun is up. Up above her, past the painted-over hatch, in the high black space under the roof, something had heard her answer. It tucked the sound of her voice away, careful, saving it back for later. And down in the kitchen, on the door of the refrigerator, the little plastic letters began, very slowly, one at a time, to slide. Walter Pym had been dead for 35 years. And in all that time, the worst part hadn't been the dying. The worst part had been the quiet. He had grown up in this house. Back then it was loud, the way a full house is loud. With his father's ball game on the radio, and his mother banging pots, and his big sister June hollering up the stairwell that supper was getting cold, and she wasn't going to call him twice. June was the one who called him Wally. Nobody had called him Wally since 1989 because for 35 years there had been nobody in the house to call him anything at all. You would be surprised how loud that gets. A silence like that doesn't stay empty. It fills up with everything you wish you could still hear Walter knew exactly what lived in the attic because he had watched it take everyone he loved, one by one, up that folding ladder and into the dark. The town used to have a name for it back when the town still bothered to remember. They called it the Rafter Man. It had been up there longer than the house had, folded into the peak of the roof like a coat nobody wears anymore, patient past anything a living person could understand. And it lived inside one hard rule, the only rule, the rule that was both the whole danger and the only mercy. It could not come down, it could not force the hatch or break a window or drag a single soul up by the hair. It could do exactly one thing. It could call. It called in borrowed voices. It would listen at the seams of the house for weeks, learning the warm, particular way a mother said her daughter's name, the exact shape of a brother's laugh, and then it would call down out of the ceiling in that stolen voice, sweet and patient as a man running a phone scam, until somebody got up out of bed and went to the hatch on their own 2 feet to find out who needed them. And here was the cruelest part of the rule. The thing could not open the hatch itself. It could not crack its own seal, not by an inch. The living had to do that part for it. They had to climb up on a chair and cut the paint and pull the cord and bring the ladder down with their own hands, and then climb it after dark, of their own choosing, rung after rung. Once they came up off the top rung into the attic, it had them, and there was no calling them back. And now, for the first time in 35 years, there were people in Walter's house again. Loud, warm, ridiculous people who left the lights on and argued about pizza and put a velvet pouch of rocks on the windowsill. And Walter, who was so lonely that the loneliness had worn him down to almost nothing, felt 2 things at once, and the 2 pulled hard against each other in opposite directions. He wanted them to stay. God help him, he wanted them to stay so badly it frightened the little of him that was left. The house had voices in it again, footsteps and laughing and the smell of food. After 35 years of talking to himself, he would have done nearly anything to keep that sound a while longer. And he had to make them leave before the Rafter Man finished learning their voices. That first night, while the youngest one woke his sister with a stolen word, Walter went down to the kitchen and gathered up every scrap of strength he owned and began to push the little plastic letters across the refrigerator door. It was slow, brutal work, like trying to write your name with the back of a spoon. 1 letter, rest. 1 letter, rest. By the gray edge of dawn, the fridge read 2 words, and Walter hung in the dark corner of the kitchen, worn down to almost nothing. And he waited for them to read it and understand. Get out. Moose found it first, because Moose was always up first, in a way that had nothing to do with being a morning person and everything to do with checking his numbers before his feet hit the floor. He opened the fridge for the oat milk, saw the letters, and stopped with the carton halfway out. "Ren," he called, "did you do the fridge?" Renata came in, tying her hair up. She read the letters. "Get out." "Did you do the fridge?" she said. "No, but it rules, so I'm going to say yes." By the time Tariq and Deb made it downstairs, Moose had already filmed the fridge from 3 different angles. He had a way of holding the phone that made any ordinary thing look like the cold open of a true crime documentary. All slow push-ins and meaningful silence. "Okay, so," he narrated low and grave, "our new house came with a passive-aggressive ghost. Day 1. He's already asked us to leave. And honestly, same. I've never felt so seen by the supernatural." Tariq leaned over the fridge and studied it up close. He pried one letter off and pressed it back on. "They're a little crooked," he said. "Magnets." There were already letters on here from the last tenant. Somebody bumped the fridge in the night. The loose ones slid. The slide happened to land in a pattern, and your brain did the rest, because brains love patterns. It's got a name. Apophenia. "Snopes has spoken," Moose said. "There is no ghost. There is only physics and disappointment." Deb did not laugh. She stood with her coffee going cold in her hand and looked at the two words like they were a phone number she had been waiting on for years. "Get out," she read, quiet. "That's not a joke, you two. That is a warning." "Mom," Moose said gently, "it's the fridge. If the fridge wanted us dead, it would just keep the milk a little warm and let nature handle it." They named the ghost that afternoon. It was Moose's idea, and the idea was Gary. "Every haunted house has a guy," he explained, setting a little tripod up on the kitchen counter. "It needs a guy, and our guy's name is Gary. Gary has been alone in this house a long time. Gary is tired. Gary has strong opinions about how we load the dishwasher. Everybody say hi to Gary." "Hi, Gary," Tariq said, not looking up from his coffee. In the corner of the room, where the light from the window did not quite reach the floor, Walter Pym watched a young man point a camera at the spot where he stood and christen him Gary. And Walter felt something he hadn't had room to feel in a long time, which was insulted. Then he set it aside because being insulted was a luxury and he had work to do. He would simply have to try harder. He was good at trying. Trying was the only thing he had left, so he tried harder. That night he poured all his cold into the bathroom mirror and wrote, "Don't go up in the fog of it." In the morning, Tariq found the words while he was shaving, took a picture, and showed Renata, who said it was sweet that Moose was keeping the bit going. Moose said he hadn't touched the mirror. Everyone agreed that was exactly what a person keeping a bit going would say. Walter knocked on the walls in the hall. 3 slow knocks, even and carefully spaced. The family decided the pipes were knocking, agreed they should call the landlord, and then nobody called the landlord. Walter slid a kitchen chair out from the table at midnight and left it sitting square in the middle of the floor, which is, in every movie ever made, the universal sign that something is in the house with you. "Gary's redecorating," Moose said in the morning, and filmed the chair and added a caption and went viral. The chair did 300,000 views in 2 days. Moose had started a separate account just for the house. He called it Our Ghost Roommate, and within a week, the fridge clip had been watched more times than everything else he had ever posted. Add it all together, twice. The comments came in like a slot machine, hitting cherries over and over, and they would not stop. Gary said, "Get out," and honestly, Mood Gary is literally me when guests come over. Not Gary being the only one in this house with any boundaries. Moose read them out loud at dinner, glowing, and the family began to talk about Gary the way you talk about a cat that is a little bit of a jerk, but is still your cat. Gary's in a mood tonight. Gary hid the good scissors again. Gary doesn't like it when we use the air fryer after 10, which honestly is fair. That thing is loud. And every single thing the ghost did to scream, "Danger, danger, danger," the family took as a joke, because they were a family that took almost everything as a joke. It was how they loved each other. And it was how they had survived the divorce and the moving and the months when the money got thin. You took the scary thing and you made it small and funny so it could not get its hands all the way around you. They were very, very good at it. It was the single worst possible defense against the thing that was actually happening in their house. Walter watched the account grow. He did not understand most of what he was looking at over Moose's shoulder. The little hearts climbing, the numbers spinning up. But he understood the shape of it. His warnings were being turned into a kind of show, and the clearer he made the message, the more careful and plain, the funnier they seemed to find it. It was Deb, in the end, who tried to look the thing up. She did it quietly on her tablet, late, while the others were watching television. She typed in the address, then the name of the street, and on the third try on a local message board that had not been touched in a decade, she found it. The house at the end of Sumner Lane, the thread said, was the old Pym place. People in Cray Hill, the ones old enough, still called it that. The Pym family had lived there in the 80s, and the Pym family had come to a bad end. The father first, people said, though the records were vague and the records were old. Then the mother. Then the daughter, June, 17, who walked out of a locked house one winter night and was never found. Not a coat, not a shoe, not a trace. And last the son, Walter, 24, found dead at the foot of the attic ladder in 1989 with no mark on him and a look on his face that the man who found him said he carried to his own grave. The thread had a name for what people whispered lived up under the roof. It called it the Rafter Man. There was a rhyme, somebody said, the kids used to chant, half remembered and changed a dozen ways. Don't climb on up when you hear them call, the Rafter Man wants you, your family and all. Deb read all of it. Then she went and stood in the upstairs hall under the painted-over hatch, in the dark, with the tablet glowing in her hands, and she put one palm flat against the wall. "Walter," she said very softly, testing it. "Is that your name? Walter?" In the dark beside her, closer than she knew, Walter Pym heard a living person say his real name out loud for the first time in 35 years, and it nearly undid him. But he had no way to answer that she would believe, and in the morning when she brought the whole thing to the breakfast table, it landed exactly the way everything landed in that house. "You guys," Deb said. "I looked it up. This is real. A family died here. A boy named Walter Pym died at the foot of that attic ladder in 1989, and the locals say there's a thing up there, they call it the Rafter Man, and there's this rhyme." "Mom," Moose breathed, already reaching for his phone. "Mom, are you telling me Gary has a documented backstory? Are you telling me Gary is canon?" "Marcus, I'm trying to..." "Walter Pym." "Oh, this is so much better. He's not Gary, he's Walter. He's a tragic Victorian boy. The Rafter Man got his whole family." Moose was typing the rhyme into his notes as fast as Deb said it. "This is lore. This is a whole season. Mom, you cracked the lore. Will you put the phone down and listen to me for one? This is the most useful you have ever been," Moose said, kissing the top of her head on his way to set up the tripod. "I love you. Madam Deb solves the case. People are going to lose their minds." Deb looked around the table at the three faces she loved, all of them grinning, and she felt, for the first time, truly and specifically afraid, and she couldn't, for the life of her, get a single one of them to feel it with her. It was Tariq who started to come apart first, which surprised everyone because Tariq didn't come apart. Tariq was the one who debunked the apart. It was a Tuesday afternoon and the house was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that has a low hum buried somewhere down inside it. Tariq was alone at the kitchen table, working a claim on his laptop, when he heard Renata call his name from upstairs. soft, a little muffled, the way you sound calling through a closed door. Tariq? Hey, come here a second. He went to the bottom of the stairs and tipped his head up toward the second floor. What? He called. Tariq. The voice came again, and it was sweeter now, and it was higher up. It was coming from the very top of the house. It was coming from up behind the painted-over hatch in the hall ceiling that had not opened in years. And Tariq, who debunked things for a living, felt every hair on both his arms stand straight up. Because he knew the way you know a wrong number is a wrong number a half second before they even speak, that Renata was not home. Renata was at the store. He had watched her car back out of the driveway 40 minutes ago, and he had waved. He did not go up. Some old animal part of him took the wheel and would not let his foot find the first step. He grabbed his keys and his laptop off the table, and he walked out the front door and got in his car and sat in the driveway with the engine off and his hands shaking in his lap until Renata's headlights finally swung in beside him in the dark. She knocked on his window. He just about came out of his skin. "Why are you sitting in the car?" she said, getting in beside him. Then she saw his face and her voice changed. "Tariq, what happened?" "Somebody was in the house," he said, "calling your name. Down the stairs at me. I said your name back and it kept calling and it moved. It went up. It was up in the attic, Ren, up behind that painted-over hatch. Calling me in your voice." Renata looked at the dark shape of the house. She looked at her boyfriend, the human lie detector, the man who had once ruined a perfectly good campfire by explaining the science of swamp gas, sitting in his own driveway with no color at all left in his face. "Okay," she said carefully. "Okay, we'll figure it out. Maybe it was the radiator, old pipes, weird acoustics. Sound bounces around in these houses." She did not believe it was the radiator, but she said it out loud in her calmest voice, because saying the calm thing was how Renata kept the floor from tilting under her. And by the next morning, with sun coming in the kitchen windows and Moose filming a bit where he conducted a formal job interview with the air vent, even Tariq had let himself be talked partway back down off the ledge. He decided he had nodded off at the table and dreamed it. He decided that on purpose, the way you decide a thing because the only other option will not fit through the door of your head. But that night, up under the roof, Walter heard the rafter man practicing. He heard it in the dark, trying Renata's voice again and again, calling Tariq. "Tariq," sanding the edges off, until it was perfect, and Walter understood that the slow part was over. For 35 years, the thing had been hungry and sealed and patient. Now it had a full house, and it had stopped waiting. It had started fishing, and it was a very, very good fisherman. Walter had one trick left that the family had not laughed at yet, only because he had not used it. The laptop, Moose left it open on the coffee table most nights, the screen lighting up the dark living room blue, like a fish tank running in an empty room. Walter had spent years watching families come and go, and he had learned a little about the machines by watching over their shoulders. He could not type the way a living person types, fingers flying, but he could press. One key, rest. One key, rest. It took him the whole night. When Moose woke up and padded out for the laptop to check his numbers, there was a document open on the screen that he had not made, and it was full of words. "It is not a joke. I am not Gary. My name is Walter Pym, and I lived and died in this house. The thing in your attic is real, and it is awake now, and it is learning your voices. It cannot come down on its own. It can only call you up. Do not answer it. Do not go up there, no matter who you think is calling you. It will use a voice you love. Take your family and leave tonight. All of you, please. I could not save mine. Please just go. Moose read the whole thing standing in the gray morning light. And for one long second, even the kid who made horror into a hobby felt the floor go thin under his bare feet. Then he laughed, the way he laughed at everything that ever scared him, because it was the only thing he knew how to do with it. "Oh, this is unreal," he said. "This is the best thing he has ever done." "Who?" Renata said, shuffling in. "Gary wrote us a letter?" "Except he's not Gary, he's Walter Pym, remember? Mom found the lore. He's begging us to leave because of the demon in the attic. He says it uses a voice you love. Ren, it's got everything. It's got stakes." Moose was already framing the shot. "I could not save mine. Are you kidding me? This is the finale." He posted it before he had finished his first coffee. Just a slow scroll down the bright screen, his own voice low over the top of it, reading the dead man's words in a breathless hush. He titled it, "Gary Finally Opened Up to Us." It was the biggest thing the account had ever done by a mile. 250,000 views before lunch, then 500,000, the number climbing all afternoon. The comments stacked up into a wall, and the family read them at dinner and laughed until Deb left the table. "Walter Pym, I would take an actual bullet for you. The demon in the attic is so real to me, you have no idea." Gary going full lore drop in the family group chat. "I am obsessed. I could not save mine." The theatrics. "Give this ghost an award?" And one comment, pinned near the top, that Moose read out to the whole table, and that made every one of them except Deb laugh until they hurt, because it was so perfectly, so exactly the joke they had all been making for 2 weeks straight. "Walter is literally me trying to warn people and getting clowned." Walter watched the number under the video climb past anything that meant something to him. And for the first time in 35 years, he wished, with the whole worn-down rag of himself, that he still had the working parts a person needs in order to cry. He had told them the truth. The whole truth, in plain words a child could follow, with his own name signed at the bottom. He had told them about the voices and the ladder and the one iron rule about his mother and June and his father. And they had set it to music. 100,000 strangers had agreed that Walter Pym, dead and frightened to the bone for these people, was being just a little dramatic about it all. That was when Walter understood there were no words left to spend. Words got laughed at. The plainer the words, the louder the laugh. The only thing left to him was the thing he had been most afraid of, which was to put his whole self between the family and the ladder, out in the open where they could really see him. And he knew exactly what that would cost. To manifest all the way to become a thing with a face and a voice they could hear, would burn through what little of him remained. There would not be enough Walter left afterward to push a single letter across a fridge door. He would be spending the last of himself in one go. To know whether it was worth spending, you have to know what he was spending it for, and to know that you have to go back. This is part 1 of the story. There's also part 2, so if you like the story and want part 2, leave a comment so I know you're interested. So if you're still here, you just made it through one of the scariest stories you will ever hear in the internet. Most people clicked away. You didn't. That means something. I want to know, and do you think this actually happened, or is it just a story? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video gave you chills, or kept you up at night, hit the like button. It takes 1 second and it tells me you want more stories like this. Subscribe to Mikey Blocks and turn on the bell, because the next story I found is even darker than this one. You don't want to miss it. Until next time, stay safe out there.